From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for the Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio, joined by fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, a little over a week out from Oklahoma's opener, but the big news obviously is that the Sooners now officially have a starting quarterback. It is Kyler Murray. Ryan, this is what we thought would happen, but it maybe took a little longer. Is that safe to say than what we expected as far as an announcement?
Yeah, maybe a little bit longer, although looking back at it yesterday, Trevor Knight a few years ago when he beat out Blake Bell, that was announced 9 days before their opener, which was, right at this was, 10 days before Oklahoma opens against Florida Atlantic. So it was right along the timeline that they've had over the last three or four quarterback searches. Obviously, Lincoln Riley wasn't here for that one. The only perspective we had on his decision-making and timeline was when Baker Mayfield won it, and that was about 12 days before the opener. But Lincoln Riley said all along that he wanted his team to know who their quarterback was going into the season opener with a little bit of time to prepare, and this was right along that timeline. And also, you've also got to look at like class schedule. They opened class on Monday, which is their first regular day of practice outside of the camp environment. And you've got to protect Austin Kendall and make sure he stays around and engaged, and certainly that's helped in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess now the question becomes who takes the reins of this job, Barry, because if it was really as tight as we were led to believe, maybe Austin Kendall's further along than a lot of us would expect. Where do you see this going from here?
Well, I mean, it's Kyler Murray's job to lose. I mean, it's his job. If he plays well, he's going to keep it. If he doesn't play well, could be a change. The question is, how long does not playing well constitute? Is that a half against UCLA? Is that a full quarter against Texas? A full game? Who knows? But it's Kyler Murray's job. If he plays well, then Austin Kendall will have to wait a year. But every reason to believe whoever's the quarterback is going to play well. Lots of weapons, lots of experience, lots of good strategy from Lincoln Riley. Everything's set for whoever the quarterback is to succeed. That quarterback is Kyler Murray. Looks like he's the man the leader in the clubhouse.
As we look at him, and there's obviously some body of work with him, having played at Texas A&M. We got to see a little bit of that. Got to see him some last year, obviously too. Ryan, in backup duty, also started one game when Baker Mayfield was suspended early on. What do we think that this offense will look like with Murray at the helm? Is it going to be largely the same? He's got some different skills, especially related to his speed. Do we expect more quarterback run game, or we've seen a lot of teams say, hey, listen, that puts your quarterback at great risk. Do you pull that back? How does that affect things as it relates to this offense, Ryan?
Well, one of the things Lincoln Riley said yesterday when he was asked about this was, I don't coach scared. And I think we saw that a few years ago when Trevor Knight was the quarterback, that maybe OU got a little bit conservative and not wanting to expose him very often. We saw Baker Mayfield a couple years ago. They did utilize the quarterback run game with him. He wasn't nearly as fast as what Kyler Murray is, but took a lot of unnecessary hits, got the concussion, although that wasn't necessarily from that. But Baker Mayfield learned how to adapt. I think that they're going to stick with that quarterback run game and make it a big part of their offense. Lincoln Riley still does what Lincoln Riley does, which is, a version of the air raid. It's obviously morphed, especially since he's arrived in Norman. But I wouldn't expect them to be afraid to run Kyler Murray very much, especially given the fact it's only pretty much going to be a one-year deal for him.
Right, because of the baseball thing, which brings up my question to you, Barry, which is Lincoln Riley says, I don't call plays scared. But how long before his phone rings and it's the Oakland Athletics on the other side after Kyler Murray gets popped on a quarterback run or two?
Well, I mean, the Athletics made their own bed. I mean, when they see a Texas Longhorn or a TCU Horned Frog pop Kyler Murray really good, that's on Oakland. I mean, that's what you got to live with. But it is a case of both Murray's family, Murray himself, Scott Boras, his agent, and the Oakland Athletics are just praying he gets through this season okay and able to get into January baseball. But you sign up for that, you're privy to it. I agree with what Ryan said about Lincoln Riley in terms of he doesn't coach scared, but he's also going to coach smart. They're not. If Kyler Murray turns out to be a really effective player, which most of us believe he will be, you're going to pick and choose your spots. This is not going to be a guy. It's not going to be a 15 play a game. He's going to take off running. That's not what OU wants to do. And certainly, the better player that Kyler Murray is, the less exposed the Sooners will make him.
Do you guys, with this baseball situation being in play and him signing the deal, the big signing bonus, we largely expect, and Scott Boras has made clear that this is likely a one-year thing. You know, Kyler Murray comes out of high school being so ballyhooed for what he did as a high school player, didn't work out at A&M. Do you guys feel like there's a large pressure, a bit of pressure on this guy to go out and play well, or do you think he sees this differently, Ryan? I mean, this is likely this one-year window for him.
You know, talking to him, it seems like he sees it a little bit differently. That it's not the pressure. I think the pressure was when he came out of Allen High School and went straight to A&M, and everybody expected him to be the Aggie savior from day one. That's when the pressure was. Now he's got $4.6 million in the bank. He's sort of doing this for fun, and there isn't that overwhelming pressure. Now, he did say he knows the quarterback history at OU, and he wants to live up to that, and that is pressure. But as far as just being overwhelmed by this being a one-year deal, given his baseball future, I don't think that that's Kyler Murray.
Barry, why do you think Kyler Murray decided to go this route? I mean, once the A's draft him, and they draft him highly, and we know his size, we expect his future in professional sports is as a baseball player. Making the decision to do this, you know, why do this? I mean, now he's the starter, but what do you sense is his reasoning behind wanting this one last shot at being a college quarterback?
Well, I mean, I just think it's something he's passionate about. I think he likes to do it. You know, his baseball career has not been as prominent as his football career. I think the plan was always for him to play college football and try to lead Texas A&M or then Oklahoma to the highest level he could and live the life of a great college quarterback. And then all of a sudden he gets in and he plays a little baseball, and last spring had a really good year, and all of a sudden the Oakland A's say, swings pretty good and runs like the wind, let's take him ninth, and gives him the chance and says, here, if you'll sign, you know, you don't have to show up. So it's the best of both worlds. And I'm not sure this was the long-range plan, but it was a plan that became open to him. And, you know, who among us wouldn't? You know, we're all doing what we love to do and passionate about it, but we've got other things we're interested in. And if we had the chance to do that, I mean, if I could sing, I'd love to be on the stage at the Civic Center. So if somebody gave me the chance, I'd do it. I wouldn't miss the OU Texas game or the NBA playoffs for it. But, you know, I mean, so I don't blame him. I don't blame him at all. And I think it's worked out fine so far. The A's seem happy. He's certainly fulfilled all his OU obligations in terms of being here in the summer and being in August and doing all the right things. So far, it seems like a plan that's got a chance to work really well.
Is anybody else interested to see the quarterback matchup in this opener? Because Florida Atlantic, they haven't named their starter yet, but it's likely to either be Chris Robinson, the former OU quarterback who transferred down there, or DeAndre Johnson, the former Florida State quarterback who went the junior college route and then ended up there. That's an interesting quarterback matchup, whichever one of those likely comes out of the Florida Atlantic situation. Now going against Kyler Murray, Ryan.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's all kinds of great storylines in this Florida Atlantic game, starting with quarterbacks. You go to Lane Kiffin and everybody that he's brought in, the success that he's had, you know, Charlie Weiss Jr. Being the coordinator there. So this is a nothing but fascinating season opener for the Sooners, and certainly that quarterback battle will be a big part of it.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves because we're still more than a week away. So I don't want to get anybody
barely at this point, though.
True. I don't want to get anybody overly excited about that opener, though. But while the Sooners named their quarterback earlier this week, we still got some other position battles that are up in the air. And maybe most importantly, at least to how that offense clicks along, is center, Barry. Looks like it's either going to be Jonathan Alvarez, who's a redshirt senior, or Creed Humphrey, a young guy that it seems like OU really likes. Who gets the nod there eventually?
My guess is Creed Humphrey. I don't know if it was going to be Alvarez. I think they would have probably gone ahead and said so. But just listening to the coaches talk a year ago, they were so high on Creed Humphrey, a freshman out of Shawnee. Now second year on campus, even more so. I think they like Alvarez. He's made 21 starts in his OU career, but looks like he might be on the bench to start this 2018 season.
You see it shaking out that way, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm with Barry. If it's going to be Jonathan Alvarez, and you know it's going to be Jonathan Alvarez, go ahead and announce it. Creed Humphrey's a guy that they've been talking about. Bill Bedenbaugh, Lincoln Riley have been talking about since the day he stepped a foot on campus. That hype hasn't died down this year. You know, they would have played him a year ago had they needed to. They had a couple of guys with Alvarez redshirting and with Humphrey redshirting. Had something happen with Eric Wren, Eric Wren stayed healthy, didn't need to use either of them. I think Jonathan Alvarez is just a very good insurance policy at this point. You know, he can play center, he can play both the guard spots. If something happens with Ben Powers or Drew Samia, or if something happens at tackle and you need to move Samia, who's played at tackle a significant amount of time, to the outside, you've got a great option, really, in Jonathan Alvarez. But I think I would be surprised if Creed Humphrey wasn't the starter. I think if it's that close and you've got a guy who's a senior versus a guy who's a freshman, give it to the guy who's a freshman, because he's got so much more room to grow than the senior, and I think that's the route they're going to go.
Yeah, and the chance to be a starter there for several years, and what a bonus that would be for any offensive line to have a center there for a long time. On the defensive side of the ball, guys, safety is a position where the battle rages because of guys they lost. And Ryan, I'm curious how you see that shaking out, because you know there are a lot of different options, but they did lose a lot of experience back there.
Yeah, they did, but they've got a little bit of depth this year, it seems like, from talking to them. Now, I don't believe much of it until we see it on Saturdays, just because of the recent history and also just in this league, the way those safeties get tested. But they love what Khalil Houghton's given them recently. But a guy, Justin Broyles, has just come almost out of nowhere. We talked about him a lot last year when he came out of John Marshall and his abilities. Wound up redshirting behind a guy like Robert Barnes, who played some. But it looks like that Justin Broyles is going to play a big role. I think Broyles and Houghton are probably the guys to start off with, although Robert Barnes has performed well, been healthy really for the first time since he arrived on campus. And I think that Buki Radley-Hiles, the five-star freshman that everybody's been raving about, we're going to see a lot of him, but it's going to be primarily at the nickel spot, I believe, unless he needs to move back there to keep him on the field. He's going to be on the field a lot. I think it's going to be really similar to the role that they had Stephen Parker in, but Buki Radley-Hiles is a much more explosive player than Stephen Parker.
Barry, they were going to lose experience back there. There's no way you can go from what they had to what's available and not lose some experience. But when you hear Ryan talk about all these really young guys and maybe never having played a Division I game being in the mix back there, does it set you on edge at all?
Well, it's similar to what we've seen at cornerback in maybe last year. The Sooners basically had a talent deficiency by their standards 2014, 2015, 2016 defensively. And last year we saw at some point they finally just threw up their hands and said, we're playing the young guys. And the Treys both played. Trey Norwood, Trey Brown, along with Parnell Motley, and some more veteran guys got sort of pushed to the side. And I think what you've seen all across the board, particularly linebacker in the secondary, Sooners have upgraded their recruiting, I think, in the last year or two, and they're not waiting. They put those guys on speed dial and said, hey, we're going to play you now, and try to get that talent level back to what they consider a championship level. It hasn't been for several years.
Speaking of a guy on speed dial, maybe unexpectedly so, a true freshman with a very familiar last name, but a walk-on status. We really didn't expect him to be in the mix, but Drake Stoops, guys, he's probably going to get some, maybe not start at wide receiver, but Ryan, it sounds like he's definitely in the mix. Yeah,
no doubt about it. Lincoln Riley just raved about Drake Stoops and the job that he's done. Although we've seen that, last year he raved about Miles Tees when he was a walk-on, and Tees didn't wind up playing a lot. But I think it was more about if this guy's going to go out and do what he's going to do, we're going to play him over a big-time recruit who's really struggling to get things. And maybe that's a kick in the pants to the guys like Michael Jones and some of those other scholarship guys to get after it. Or is he ready to play immediately, and do you use him right off the bat? But maybe we should have seen this coming with the job that Drake Stoops did in high school. He was fantastic at Norman North, made a lot of really tough catches. And then also the scholarship offers he had. That's not a, this isn't a guy who walked on because it was his only opportunity. He had some Division I chances. He decided to stick close to home and play for the school his dad coached at forever. It's
interesting, I mean, to think that there could be a Stoops out there playing in an Oklahoma jersey, Barry. I mean, for all of the links with Bob and Mike and the coaching, there's not been one of the family that's come through, and there's been some older cousins and some things that could have potentially played for Oklahoma, did not. But it's interesting, as Ryan said, that Drake Stoops turned down the chance to go somewhere else, even with the name recognition, the pressure to be a walk-on at Oklahoma, and now to see where he's taken that, that's a testament to a kid that's really kind of put himself out there.
Well, anybody that saw him play in high school could tell he's a competitor, could tell that he's a feisty, hard-nosed receiver, a guy that itches to get on the field, a big play man at Norman North. Now, I don't know if he's going to end up playing. I don't know if he'll ever make the rotation. He may end up with 300 career catches. Anything's possible. But here's the deal: you can just watch him. We came to know Bob Stoops in a lot of different ways over 18 years as the Oklahoma coach. The one thing we sometimes forget is just what a competitive rascal he is and was even before he got to Iowa, growing up in Youngstown. And, Bob's told some of the stories about, his two twin boys had some of the same experiences. They didn't have 4 brothers, but there were 2 of them. And some of just the shenanigans they get into, just fighting with each other, they made themselves competitive. So shouldn't be a surprise if Drake Stoops gets on the field as a freshman.
Okay, lots of interesting questions that we think will be answered eventually with a depth chart. We'll see. We'll see how that goes, when that might be released. But, guys, I think big picture on this season, it's really interesting as we go into year 2 of Lincoln Riley's tenure as the head coach at Oklahoma. Obviously, your first year is Baker Mayfield's last year, his Heisman year. Things tend to go pretty well when you got a quarterback like Baker Mayfield calling the plays. Barry, from your perspective, is there a heightened level of expectation on Lincoln Riley, or how does this all play? Because this was going to be a tough transition regardless. You lose a guy like Mayfield, and there's a lot to make up for there. But where do you think this sort of fits in terms of Lincoln Riley year 2 and just what the Sooners have moving forward?
Well, I mean, this is new territory for Lincoln Riley. He's been here 3 full seasons, and Mayfield was his quarterback all 3 years. So there's every reason to believe, though, that Lincoln Riley is going to be okay without Baker Mayfield. This Oklahoma football team is going to be okay without Baker Mayfield. They're not going to get the spectacular, historic play that we saw from Mayfield, but they don't recruit bums to come and play quarterback at Oklahoma. They're all talented. They're all good in their own way. They've got all the elements you need. The line's fantastic. They got playmakers, backfield, and receivers. Last year, remember, the storyline was, hey, Mayfield's back, but the guys he's given the ball to are all unproven. Well, it didn't take long. C.D. Lamb, Marquise Brown, Trey Sermon, Rodney Anderson. They just, playmakers came out of the woodwork. All those guys are back. You got that line. Every reason to think this offense is still going to be really, really high level.
Yeah, and I guess when I talk about expectations, Ryan, the expectation is, are you making the college football playoff or not? I mean, that's what it comes down to, because where the Sooners are, ranked still top 10 by most people, believed to be one of the top 10 teams in the country, expected to play for a Big 12 championship. So with all those pieces, obviously Lincoln Riley was in a unique situation last year as a first-year coach, still calling plays during the game, had such an experienced guy in Mayfield with those younger guys coming on around him. Do you see much changing in the way Lincoln Riley does what he did a year ago, or is it just going to be status quo carrying on and just maybe riding some of those more experienced position guys that you've got on offense?
Yeah, I think especially early in the season as they break in a new quarterback, they're going to ride guys like Rodney Anderson especially to establish the run game. Anderson was fantastic at the end of last year. I think people forget how good Trey Sermon was last year just because of what Anderson was able to accomplish. I think they might lean on those guys a little bit more, but I don't think there's going to be any big wholesale changes. I think it's eventually going to catch up to maybe where they were a year ago. I'm with Barry. This isn't going to be a record-breaking type of offense, but I think it's going to be an offense that's probably going to be good enough to get you to that level. The question is, will their defense be good enough to get them at that level? Because they had such a historic offense last year, you could make up for some defensive deficiencies. I don't think it's going to be quite have that ability this year. But is the defense going to be better to fill that gap?
Well, and that leads to our last bit before we get out of here, which is Mike Stoops, because he's always under the gun. And I thought he said some interesting stuff this week talking about, not having that Eric Striker, not having that Obo Okoronkwo that you can sort of turn loose to really affect the opposing offenses. He doesn't feel like he has that guy this year. Ryan, I got to think that puts some added pressure on Mike Stoops in a position that has a lot of pressure as it is.
Yeah, it does. They're going to have to rely really heavily on a guy like Kenneth Mann playing the other defensive end spot. He was just a pass rusher last year, almost exclusively playing behind DJ Ward. He's got to be an every down back guy this year and have the ability to be disruptive. Kenneth Murray needs to take a big step forward. We talked about the secondary guys. They need a lot of guys to make progress, because it's not going to be about that one guy just getting after the quarterback all the time like they've had with Okoronkwo and Striker over the last few years. Yes, they still want production out of that jack spot, whoever that winds up being, but it's not going to be all about that spot as it has been recently.
Barry, Lincoln Riley has been very much behind Mike Stoops in the year plus he's been the head coach. There were issues last year, obviously, after that Iowa State loss, which shocked so many people. We saw some improvement and things just continued on. But that's going to be a question Lincoln Riley's probably going to have to answer from time to time, is Mike Stoops' employment status. Lincoln Riley, though, seems very much assured that this is the guy he wants in that spot. I mean, what would it take to sort of maybe shift things a little bit for Lincoln Riley? I mean, winning, obviously, even if your defense isn't playing great, probably heals all. But what do you sort of see in that relationship between Lincoln Riley and Mike Stoops?
Well, I think this is a big year for Mike Stoops. Another year of mediocre defense, which is basically what we've seen the last couple of years, I think could make Lincoln Riley consider a change. He's very loyal to Bob Stoops. I think he believes in Mike Stoops. I don't think he's bluffing, but the product has not been all that spiffy the last couple 3 years. So at some point you have to make a change if things are not at a high level, and right now they're not. There's reason to think they will improve. As we talked about, the talent's getting better. But another year of mediocre defense could lead to a change in coordinator for the Sooners.
All right, lots more to discuss as this season opener fast approaches. Next week we'll be in game week. We'll talk a lot about Florida Atlantic and what the Sooners are planning with that game on Saturday. So you want to come back for the Red Zone next week. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.